Hi friend, this is Loli. Welcome to my channel. Today we will be making some DIYs using these wood signs from the dollar store. They have the pumpkin carve out, and we will start by sanding down all the rough surfaces to make sure that we have the smoothest surface possible. Make sure everything, all the sand is off your area, because after this you will be painting. We'll be using this, I believe it's called Dutch Aqua from Folk Art. We're going to use this as our base color. I did one coat actually. I did one coat, sloppy coat of this, because this is just a color we will be using for our lettering. Then I took one of these sticker posters from the DollarTree and removed the F-A-L-L to spell the word fall. I arranged them the way that I wanted them in the board and stuck them on. Just make sure that your spacing is accurate. If I eyeballed mine, but you can always use a ruler or any other thing to help you with correct spacing on there. Once I was done with this part right here, I went over it with some of my chalk paint from Rust-Oleum. I used linen white for this. Make sure that everything is properly stuck on to make sure that your letters are crisp and that no paint leaks underneath for the best results. I gave these about 3 light coats, trying not to saturate the stickers too much to avoid any bleeding. Once that was complete, I took my weeder and tried removing the stickers. However, the paint seemed to have made the stickers a little bit too wet, so it was a little bit harder to remove than I anticipated. So I had to do some scraping, but nothing that my weeder couldn't help me with. And once I was done, this was a painstaking process, but I got it done. At the end, it came out all right. So here I'm using one of these fabrics from the DollarTree. This one is the one that has all the sunflowers. And I'm trying to do something that I got from Kathy Jo, from Kathy Jo's DIY. I really love her channel, so I'm always watching her. And she made one of these as well, and I thought it was pretty cool the way it came out, so I wanted to try it myself. So I tried my best to form the pumpkin in the outside. It was starting to look like a boob, so I had to go over and remove some of the stuffing I had put in it and make it a little bit less filled, and make sure that I put the fabrics in all the nooks and crannies to form the shape of the pumpkin. Once I remove the excess, oh, my lights were giving me trouble there, guys. I had one of my lights go off on me in the middle of this DIY, and I was determined to finish it, so pardon my poor lighting in this segment of the video there. So what I did there, I removed the excess, and then I tacked down with some hot glue all the little items, again making sure that every little curve within that pumpkin had the fabric wrapped around it pretty neatly, not to lose that shape of the pumpkin. Once I was happy with that, I added some more hot glue to all the little areas, making sure that everything was tacked down correctly. So once I put pressure onto my stuffing, I will not have anything come right through the other side of my board there. And with this, take your time. I sped up the video here. I was working in a lot less speed than here, but take your time. Make sure that everything lines up correctly so you can have the best result with your pumpkin. Okay, here I am making sure all of those areas there have stuffing as well to properly form the pumpkin. Once I was happy, I cut 3 pieces of the fabric and placed it in the back of the opening there. So I'm a little bit out of focus here. I couldn't put it on my table because the stuffing kept coming out, so I had to have it hanging off my table in order for it to stay where I wanted it and to properly have a flush backing to put the fabric onto. So I just used hot glue. I stacked one section of the pumpkin in there with the fabric, and I made sure that dried first, and then I did the other side holding the fabric taut in order for it to keep the stuffing in place. I wanted it to be flush in the back and that the stuffing couldn't move around freely, and the shape of my pumpkin will be preserved. If you're planning on using this outside, I will recommend to use some E6000 along with the hot glue. And I did the same thing with the other side. I put 3 of the fabric pieces alongside each other until the complete opening was covered. And then once you finish that last piece of your fabric there, just, it's easier because everything already has been tucked on, but you might have a little bit extra fabric. So just go ahead and take your scissors and remove any excess that can show towards the front of the project you're working here there. All right, here I was happy with the results. So I'm moving on to the next step in the process. Here you see me sanding down the board down with the part where the letters are. I wanted it to be a little bit more flush, and also it looked a little bit more rustic and worn. So I did that, and then the powder or the excess of the paint gave the letters that whitewash look. Now I am cutting a little piece that I'm going to use as a swatch for the bottom of this piece. I'm going to put it right where my scissors are sitting right now, but I wanted it to be a little bit worn as well, so I took off some threads and just making it be, I can't remember the word right now, guys, but just taking some threads off so the edges will be frayed. That's the word. I just used some hot glue to attach one side. I held it taut, waited for it to dry. Once that side was dry, I flipped it to the side again to make sure that I'm placing the fabric evenly. Then I flipped it once more, held it in place, and added some hot glue to the back of the little fabric there, tucked it down and held it until it was completely dry. Burning my fingers along the way, as you can see. There we go. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, I like it, but I just feel like it doesn't have much color. But so I decided to add some of this piping from the DollarTree as well. I started in the bottom because I wanted the seam to be in the bottom, not in a more visible part of the work art, the art piece there. So I used hot glue to attach this one. Later on I used hot glue and E6000, hot glue and E6000. I just keep putting the hot glue in some areas and the E6000 in the middle. Just make sure that you put your E6000 on first, since it have a longer drying time that your hot glue does. So here it was, it was a little bit hard to do it. I don't have precision hot glue guns, so I did the best I could with this little space there with the tip that I had with my hot glue. And I kept cleaning along the way. I didn't want the glue to be showing on the other side. So here I'm showing you the E6000. This is what I used. And I kept adding some E6000 in some places and leaving room for my hot glue as well. The E6000 helps this having more longevity and it not breaking so easy, and it's more it's better for having these pieces out in the climate when the heat. So try to use both. So now that I added my E6000 to that area, I am adding the hot glue in the areas where I did not put any E6000. And I am working in small sections to avoid my hot glue drying too soon and not having the proper adherence to the piece here. And when you do this, try to use some kind of silicone mat underneath, because you will have some leaking, and it is a lot easier if you have something like the mat I'm using there to place put on your surface, so you don't have your project sticking to your table or sticking to craft paper or anything like that. So I went all the way around, and once I met the other end, I cut my piping in a little angle to have a more seamless look to the borders there. I added a little bit of hot glue and tried to tuck down a little hairs that were sticking out from the piping to try to make it look as seamless as possible. So now I'm taking my jute twine from DollarTree. I just place it inside of the little food container for babies. It's just easier for me so the cord doesn't go rolling as I'm trying to use it. So what I did is I created a finger bow by wrapping my jute twine around my hand a couple times and leaving two little ends tails there at the end. And then I took another piece of twine and used it to tie the middle of my bow and make sure that it was tight. And then you see I kind of slipped there and threw everything on the ground, but you know, there's no crafting without accidents with Loli. So here I'm cutting off all the excess. I put a little dab of glue in where the little knot is, and in order to allow it not to unravel. So now I am cutting off a tiny little piece of that fabric to go in the middle of my bow to tie it all together. I just placed a little bit of hot glue in the middle and folded my fabric both ways. And here we have a cute little bow. Once I was done with that, I cleaned off all my area, and I'm going to attach the bow to the bottom. There I was trying different, scenarios, but I prefer it in the bottom there. So I placed it in the bottom there, and I just attached it with a little bit of E6000 and a little bit of hot glue. And here I didn't listen to myself. I should have put the E6000 first. So here I'm adding the bow and making sure that it's fluffed up the way I like it. And here it is. This was supposed to be a completed product, but I was still not so happy. So I am going for another look on here. I'm going to make another little bow. No, I'm sorry. What am I doing here again? Oh, yes, I am getting ready to create my little a little hanger. I took the jute twine, added a knot to one end, looped it using a little bit of hot glue in one of the tips, looped it to the other side, and made another bow at the other end. I looped the thread twice throughout the same hole in order to make a bigger knot so nothing will go through the little holes. Cut off the excess, and added a little bit of hot glue to my knot so it will not unravel. And this version was complete, but it just seemed like there was more to do to it. I wasn't feeling this one. So I added another bow to my pumpkin using some jute twine. And I did it the same way. I just created a awareness bow, cropped it in the middle, and then tied it together using another piece of jute twine. And this time I did not knock down everything off my dresser or my table there. Just making sure that all the twine is properly placed, that I'm happy with my bow before I completely tighten that knot there. And here was a little bit hard for me to figure out which one was the twine that I used the knot with and which one's on my tail. So I had to take my time and figure it out. And then once I was ready, I cut off the exit and again the excess, and again I add a little bit of hot glue to the ends to make this secure. And now it's time to attach it, so I add a little bit more hot glue and I place it where I wanted to have it, right there where the stem of the pumpkin begins. And this is how this one was for the first take, but I was not happy. It looks a lot better in the camera right now than it did in person. It just feel like it was a little too washed up. I wanted a little bit more color, so I decided, okay, let me distress it a little bit to give it more of that fall vibe. So I went ahead and did that. To me, it seemed more like it was a summer sign more than fall. So I used some of this chestnut color from Apple Barrel, and I used a tiny little paintbrush just to create some little, a little bit of staining here and there, some distressing on the area there. This was the first level of distressing. I wanted it to be like different tones on the distressing. So I used this one. I used this color, which is the chestnut from Apple Barrel, and I also used my antique wax. So here I'm doing that part. And I should have used a bigger brush, but I wanted it to be like small details. I didn't want huge streaks since like the board is a little bit narrow. So I did that, and so far this is how it comes out with. And I'm like, okay, it looks okay, all right. It's not like wow to me yet, so I'm adding some more distressing with my antique wax. Here I use a chippy brush instead to give it more of that wood look. So I just added it to all over the piece there, including over the letters a little bit as well, so everything looked like it was cohesive and all tied in together, and all the items in this piece was outside and the elements getting the same treatment. So that's why I went over the letters as well. And I liked it here, I did, but it wasn't giving me that wow. Still, I don't know, today I was not easily pleased that day when I was creating this. So I was like, okay, it's cute. I put it to the side, I'm done. And I'm like, nope, I'm not done. I'm not liking it. Something is not working for me here. So I'm like, okay, let me give it another pass of the white to tone down that red a little bit, because the chestnut color came out a little bit too red for my liking. So I wanted to tone it down a little bit, let it look a little bit more, it was too sharp. I wanted it to be more like an undertone. So using my chip brush, I whitewash the board now, so it will have that white with that undertone of the antique wax underneath and the chestnut as well. So I went over it with the white once more, being careful not to put paint all around my edges and my fabric. I really should have done this before, but I didn't think I was going to distress it until I actually had the everything on place. I was like, okay, something's missing here, this doesn't seem right. So I said, you know what, the letter needs to pop a little more. So I went in with a tiny paintbrush and I painted my letters in with a different color. What I did here, I mixed my chestnut color together with a wine color from Folk Art. I'm not sure what is the exact name of it, because unfortunately there's a whole bunch of paint all over the name of it and I couldn't tell. So I just used a small brush, took my time. This is sped up a lot, guys. I just try to be as precise as possible so I will not have to be fixing too many things at the end, because usually when you rush, and especially when you're trying to make fine lines and stay in the border, this doesn't work. You just gotta take your time when you try to do this. So I went over it, each letter carefully, making sure to stay in the lines. And I went over the lines a couple times here and there, but that was easy to fix. So once I finished doing this, I gave it another pass, but I made sure to stay with long straight lines because I wanted this to feel like a little wood I wanted to have a wood feel to it. So I wanted all the strokes to be in the same direction, at least on all the down strokes. And this paintbrush was excellent for doing this, really. So it was a lot easier for me to do it this way, and it was almost minimal things to be fixing. So I think only the L in the beginning was the biggest problem. That one, I made the downwards motion have a tiny little belly, if you can see it there. But I'm gonna go ahead and make sure that this dries up. I use my heat gun to dry it. And a trick that I found out using this by mistake, it was a total accident, but I'm actually glad that I found out, is that if you use this piping on the side and you apply a little bit of heat to it, it tends to, like, I don't know, to shrink into itself, and it gives more of a rope look to it. So I like that. It just made everything more secure, and it went closer to the wood. So I like the character that gave. So here I went over with an even smaller brush, precise brush, to use some of my white paint to fix all those areas in which I went too thick or I went out of the lines. Just cleaning up my letters, making sure that everything is nice and neat. And this is a better look, and you can see what I'm doing there. Like, I'm fixing all those edges there and trying to make it as sharp as possible. This is a rustic sign, but I do like my letters to be pretty, nice and neat. So I'm just fixing all those areas using my white paint and this tiny little brush. I really enjoy this part. It was very satisfying to see how crisp the letter came out at the end. So here you see me cleaning off all the little ends. This brush is so minimal. It's one of my favorite brushes, especially when I'm doing stenciling, because it helps me a lot in fixing my errors like this. Sorry, I'm just staring here at how satisfying it is to see the letters all fixed and all great. All the white paint just comes over and just saves the day each time. Now I'm gonna go ahead and distress with a little bit more white, just to try to make everything look cohesive with the edges that I just did, because now that looks super white while everything else was distressed and had those undertones. So I just went over everything with a little bit more white to make it, seem a little bit more like the other white paint that I just used to clean off the edges. And I went over with a little bit more of the color that I made there using the wine color and the chestnut, because there was an area there in which I put a little bit of white on my letter there. So with some more cleaning up, I just wanted everything to look like it was one piece. I did have some places that were blotchy with white and other places that were blotchy with the distressed. So I just went over the blotchy with the distressed areas and softened them up with some more white paint. And here it looks pretty white, but in reality it's great. And here is a finished product. You can see the little undertones of the antique wax and the chestnut on there. My letters are nice and crisp. I love how rustic this one turned out. It is one of my favorites now. I put in a lot of time and effort into it. I hope you like it. Here is DIY number 2. For this one, we will be using the black version of the pumpkin cutout sign from the DollarTree. The first thing I did with this piece was add a little bit of fabric, and I used this fabric from the DollarTree. What I did was measure out a piece that will cover that cutout right there, and I cut a square big enough to cover it. I used the lines from the buffalo checks to help me cut. That way I didn't have to involve any straight razors or anything like that. I could have also made a circle. It doesn't really matter. I don't know, for some reason I just made a square. It just seemed easier since, the lines were there. I turned it over to the side that I was supposed to be my back. I put my fabric on backwards so the front will show through the hole. And then I used some E6000 in some areas. And My 6000 got all clogged there, so I just use a little skewer to open it back up, and I'm just putting it in some areas along the side here where I will be supplementing the open areas with some hot glue. I just want this to stay put, so I didn't want to just go with hot glue. Once I was done with that, I got my hot glue, and I am adding some hot glue to it as well. Again, hot glue is instant hold, E6000 is longevity. So I added the fabric right in there, again using small sections, holding the fabric taut, make sure that everything was nice and straight, that my buffalo checks were straight as well, and that there was no lumping or any wrinkling on my fabric there. So I just made sure that it was stretched out on all ends, and I added extra hot glue to any other flaps to make sure that I had a little bit of extra hold. And this is how the other end was. I removed my little glue webs, and we are done with this section. And now I'm making sure that everything is nice and neat, cleaning off my section, cleaning out my area there. Just make sure that all the dust, I got some dust coming out, and here once everything was dust free, I took out my lettering that I made on my Cricut. I printed and weeded it, and one says yellow, and one says hello in yellow, and then autumn on the buffalo check vinyl there. Just make sure everything is straight on here. As usual, I eyeballed it. I rarely use any measuring tool sometimes, and this is something that has to be super precise. And here I was having a little bit of problem with the vinyl. This is actually vinyl from the DollarTree. I found that the color ones are a lot much better than the ones that are white and black. I purchased the white one. I tried to do the buffalo check lettering using those, and it didn't come out right. I had a lot of crinkling and extra cutting for my machine, so I went with the buffalo check. It seemed to be thicker vinyl for some reason, so I placed it down, and I knew the distance I wanted it from my hello, placed it down, and kept rubbing it on and peeling my transfer tape as I was going. It was a little bit hard in this surface to have the letter stick for some reason. I'm not sure, because it's more like shiny, it's not as porous, but eventually I was able to attach it all. And this is how the letters turned out. I went ahead and added some of this yellow piping from the DollarTree as well, all the way around. I just wanted to give it a pop of color here, so I did that. And now you will see me here creating a little hanger. I've used some black beads and some white beads that I got from Walmart at the end of Christmas season. So I just have a garden with these colors that I keep dipping into for different DIYs. Here I did it double. I wanted to have a looped hanger at the end and then beads in the middle. So I doubled up my jute, folded it, and put some hot glue in the end, twisted it with my finger to make it a little bit stiffer, and weeded my beads onto it like that. I did a pattern of white, black, white. So I used 4 beads of each color. This one was giving me a little bit of a hard time, but I just kept twisting on as if it was a screw, and eventually it wiggled itself in. So I'm checking there for my length. Once I was happy, I made a knot in the top of the last bead that I weeded, leaving a loop in the top in order to use for my hanger. Once I was done, I removed all of the glue that I had added in order to weed the beads in, to have a cleaner jute there for my hanger. So once I was done with that, I went over and attached one of the sides of the beads in with that one of the tails that was missing. I looped it through the back of the hole and made a knot at the front, so the hanger will be coming out of the back with the knots in the front. And here I did the same thing, added a little bit of hot glue to my end, made it nice and straight, and looped it through the back of the sign facing into the front, made my knot to keep it nice and taut, and then went over and cut the excess with my scissors and added a little bit of hot glue to both of my knots so they will stay in place. I did eventually. And here you see me cleaning off any extra hot glue at the end. And I wasn't happy with how the letters looked as having the black as a background, so I used them as stencils instead, and now I am painting that bottom half of the sign with my white chalk paint. I taped it off just using some masking tape. Now I'm using my Cricut weeding tool to remove the vinyl that was placed, and I am trying to do this while my paint is dry in order to not allow any ripping or anything that will, damage the shape of my letters. So it's just a cleaner finish if you weed when the paint is still wet. I did dry in between some coats, but it wasn't very dry. It was in between the last coat, so I remove all my letters, and this is what I'm left off with. It was so nice and clean. I just had to scrape off some extra bleeding here and there, just very minimal though. And here I am taking off my masking tape and Hooker Clean that looks right there. I just love it. This is very nice. I like it. This is much more like I was envisioning. And now I'm gonna just finish it off with this strap of buffalo check vinyl from the Dollar Tree. This is just left over from cutting those letters, so I just wanted to add it a little bit more for balance there. And I just make sure that everything was even, measure twice, cut once. And now I'm gonna just add it on. I'm peeling off my vinyl. I'm gonna attach it to one corner, making sure that it's nice and straight. And once it is straight, I am going to roll off the back end of the rest of the vinyl. And I'm gonna make sure to hold the vinyl up as I'm going, just so I can make sure that goes down straight. And then when I'm ready, I just secure it really nicely. There we go. And I had a little bit of extra for some reason, so I just snipped the little end right there, and so that will fall nice and flush. And here we go. This is the finished product. This one I'm very happy with, and here it is all completed. I tried to do a rustic farmhouse and a modern farmhouse. Let me know if I accomplished my plan, and please let me know which one is your favorite. I really enjoy making both of these, and I can't wait to make more. I love fall, and I hope you love them too. Thank you so much, like always, guys, for spending time with me, giving me some time of your day, and watching my videos. Bye. Don't forget to subscribe.